Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report in Paris. Hey, we've moved on from just printing lots of money and incurring lots of debt for dumb reasons to printing lots of money and incurring lots of debt for extraordinarily dumb reasons. Stacy.
Right. Well, France is a place that knows revolution based on inflation and inflation prices. I remember it all came down to let them eat cake when the food prices were too high. Well, today we're in more inflation around the world, and just that we've been covering this for the last few months now with this stagflation emerging. But here's some more shocking information. First, we'll go back to the US with these first two. The national average rent in multifamily buildings, i.e. apartment buildings, rose 10.3% from a year earlier to $1,539, the first double-digit rise in the data set's history from Yardi data. Over the past 10 years, the average pace of growth has been 2%, but it's now 10%.
Well, as we've been saying, the purchasing power of the fiat money US dollar has always been falling. It was kept away from utter collapse by transporting all of America's manufacturing capacity to China for a while. But that trick is finished now. So now all this money printing is just causing the purchasing power to fall dramatically. That's called inflation. And so people's quality of life is now deteriorating rapidly because of money printing, which is something that doesn't have to be the case. They don't have to do it. They don't have to print the money. They do so because they're lazy and they're corrupt.
Remember, what we've seen is extraordinary amounts of money printing, not only from the central banks printing credit, but stimulus coming from the governments to the pocketbooks of Americans. As we've covered, a lot of Americans actually earned a lot more unemployed and locked down at home. But importantly, there were no expansion in goods and services, right? It's only what China was the only economy left standing in the entire past year and a half. So whatever they were able to produce and ship, importantly, there's only so many ships in the world, right? And the ports are only so big and can handle so many ships. So you're seeing that a huge amount of cash meet a limited supply. U.S. producer price inflation jumps 8.3% in August, the largest year-on-year increase on record. Remember, Jay Powell, the Fed, the Treasury, Janet Yellen, she also said, this is transitory. Don't worry, it's going to be fine. We hope so. Everybody hopes so. But right now, the numbers look biggest ever on history of the United States anyway. Of course, Europe has had some big hyperinflations in their past.
Right, and they categorically state that the problem is deflation. Jay Powell and Janet Yellen and policymakers and politicians overtly lie in a way that is disingenuous. It's they call it deflation. People's prices for stuff, energy and food is going up, but they say that's deflation. So again, when you have public officials who are allowed to simply state categorically falsehoods like this, unchecked, then that's part of the problem.
Of course, Germany is always the worst one in terms of nobody wants inflation there, right? And however, good morning from Germany, where inflation pressures keep rising. Germany's wholesale prices jumped 12.3% year on year in August versus 11.3% in June. This was the highest monthly annual rate of change since October of 1974 after the first oil crisis. And you could see the chart there looking pretty steep over in Germany.
Right. When Mario Draghi was running the European Central Bank, which is really the leftover from the German central bank, the Bundesbank, everyone thought that all the quantitative easing and money printing would end. It wouldn't go into Europe. They wouldn't, because they know the tragedy of inflation in the 1930s led to the rise of totalitarianism and the death of millions. And they said, we're not going to let hyperinflation come in. But Draghi and the European Central Bank did it anyway. So they clearly did not learn any of the lessons of the 1930s. They're trying, to, in fact, to repeat them by hyperinflating their currency, by rewarding the worst. It's a kakistocracy. You've got out of control bureaucrats who are acting as lunatics, and they're being rewarded as such.
Right. Well, it's kind of the entropy of the system, right? This debt saturation happens, and at a certain point, you can only pile so much more debt on top of the old promises that will never be met. And at a certain point, you reach a generation, whether it's millennial or Z, that you've brought forward all of their consumption over the previous 50 years. And there becomes a moment of collision of the generations, of societies, of food prices. So we could be at that now. You never know. It usually happens slowly and then suddenly. And what are they going to do? The ECB has started to taper a little bit. They were purchasing 80 billion euros per month of assets. Now they're down to between 60 and 70 billion, but they need more. So let's look at what's happening in the Eurozone in terms of how they're going to keep on feeding this Ponzi, because Max, you've always said you can't taper a Ponzi, right? EU to propose exempting green bonds from deficit and debt limit calculations. Christine Lagarde over at the ECB was saying, like, the ECB is tapering, but we need some more money, right? We need fiscal support, i.e. the nation states within the Eurozone need to increase how much they're spending on stimulus and domestically. So remember, with Europe, the way it's set up, the structure of the monetary union is that EU budget rules created in 1997 and changed 3 times since then set limits on government borrowing to protect the value of the euro. They require EU countries to cut debt below 60% of GDP and annual deficits to below 3% of GDP or face fines. While the rules were temporarily suspended in 2020 to give governments more scope to fight the coronavirus pandemic, they are due to be reinstated in 2023. And Max, they want to change that again. Obviously, in 2023, they won't be able to unwind this debt because the data on that, according to the Commission, the 19 countries that share the euro will have a budget deficit of 8% of GDP this year, up from 7.2% last year, while their public debt is set to reach 102.4% of GDP. There is no way this number can ever again drop back to 60%.
Well, we know from the episode of Greece that they shirked the rules of debt to GDP to fraudulently allow Greece into the EU so that Goldman Sachs and the leadership of Greece could attack it with credit default swaps and make billions of dollars on its destruction. So they don't respect laws. They write laws as befits their need to steal. It's called larceny.
It's also called entropy, and the inevitable, immutable future outcome of any debt-based system is always going to collapse in an avalanche of bad debts. Always. It doesn't matter what sort of tricks, what sort of rules, what sort of think tanks say, what sort of ideas they come up with. There's no magic solution to it other than Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. But you could slow the entropy by having someone other than a crook run the system.
So the way these bureaucratic systems work is it's think tanks, economists, commissions that come up with these ideas. We didn't think of this, but we'll allow it because these think tanks of very smart people came up with these ideas. So the green golden rule and the MMT argument are being presented. On one hand, the Zero Hedge article points out a think tank has come up with a green golden rule, excluding net green investment from the fiscal indicators used to measure fiscal rule compliance is the most promising option to address this tension, this tension being the deficit and the debt levels. So the debt levels are over 100% to GDP, which is obviously the point where the IMF itself is always saying that's the danger zone when a country is likely to default. So because of all the stimulus, all the lockdowns, the shutdowns that are ongoing, it's impossible to get back down to the EU rules. from here, especially as all these variants emerge. So the green golden rule, remember, I think it was Gordon Brown in the UK who came up with the golden rule, right? That you can only borrow to invest. That was the only thing that the government would do, to borrow to invest. So here it's the green golden rule. And the other thing they point out is that predictably, some EU officials argue the rules reflect past realities when debt was relatively low and interest rates were relatively high, as opposed to the high debt and very low or even negative cost of borrowing now, which makes high debt more sustainable. This is also known as the MMT argument.
Right. The point of tension, or what they're running up against, is the respect for human rights. Money printing violates human rights. Christine Lagarde is violating human rights by killing the purchasing power of the hard-earned money of the people living in Europe, who therefore are having trouble surviving. And she's doing what every money printer in the history has always done, justified her abuse of human rights by calling it something else. It's newspeak, it's Orwellian newspeak. Because she has an expensive haircut and nice clothes doesn't mean she's any less of an authoritarian disaster.
I saw the German newspapers had images of the ECB's balance sheet, because that's hit all-time highs. I think it's 8.65 trillion euros. A greater percentage of GDP than the US Fed. The US Fed is under 40%, which is still the biggest in history in the US, right? Of the US Fed. And in the Eurozone, it's double that. So, it's over 80% of debt to GDP on the balance sheet of the ECB. So they're piling on that debt for sure. And how it ever gets unwound amidst an ongoing lockdown and COVID sort of crisis, who knows?
Well, I think The Hague is still up and running. The Court of Human Rights, I think this is where Christine Lagarde is headed when we finally do an accounting and understand that this was a massive fraud and that people were absolutely disenfranchised to benefit a few career criminals. All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Pierre Noizat. He's the CEO and founder of Paymium. He's been writing some brilliant stuff on energy and money. But first, Pierre, let's do a little look back in history here. You were at the very first Bitcoin conference, as we were, Max and Stacy. Took place in Prague in 2011. You're a Bitcoin OG for sure. You've flown us here to Paris to celebrate your company's 10th anniversary. It sounds like it's going to be an exciting event. But tell us briefly about Paymium and what you've seen over the past 10 years.
Well, Paymium is one of the very first Bitcoin exchanges in the world. We were number 3, I believe, after MT Gox and BTC back then. And we offered people to exchange Bitcoin for euros. So that also was new because the others were dealing in dollar. And the other 2 disappeared. so have disappeared. So we are left as the most, the oldest, the longest running Bitcoin exchange in the world. It's been quite a ride, and I'd say it's been basically about erasing frictions with the legacy system, with the euro banking system.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second, because right now it seems like the legacy banking system is finally figuring out the threat that Bitcoin poses. At first, they treated it like a novelty, magic internet money, but now with El Salvador taking it on as legal currency, Ukraine legalizing, other countries following suit, it seems like the revolution is really, really happening.
It is. It is happening, and there is nothing they can do about it. So all they can do is delaying tactics and trying to spread FUD about it, so people don't invest in Bitcoin. Still think it's, as you said, magic money, internet money, as if the euro was not magic money.
Yeah, good point. The fiat money is really just printed out of thin air.
Yeah, I keep saying the euro is just a stable coin using an obsolete technology. That's what the euro is today.
Right.
And people start realizing it, and obviously the incumbents are just trying to draw their attention to something else, like energy, as if there was an energy issue with Bitcoin, which doesn't exist.
Yeah, we're going to get into that. Now, of course, your background is in engineering. I notice a lot of people who stay in Bitcoin the longest have backgrounds in engineering. It's what attracts them to this project. And so speaking about the engineering side of Bitcoin, let's talk about the proof of work algorithm. So briefly describe to the audience what it is and how important it is to Bitcoin.
Yeah, the algorithm of the protocol of Bitcoin is designed to monetize energy, and the economics are such that it's about monetizing energy surpluses. That is the cheapest possible energy. So it provides some kind of floor price for the energy, because miners are incentivized to go for the cheapest one. Otherwise, they are just not profitable compared to their competitors. So it's a global system. Therefore, there is a global arbitrage for the cheapest energy price. And that's how the Bitcoin protocol is designed. So it's typically a competition for gold, because gold is also a proof of energy. When I get a piece of gold, a gold coin, it's in fact a proof of energy, that the energy that's been required to extract it, mint it, get it to the place of the transaction, etc. So that's a stock of energy. And energy comes in two forms, basically, as a flow or as a stock. And as a flow, it's what people call renewable energy. So it's solar, electricity, potential energy, also energy you can't see, but that's there. And stocks is basically any finished good is a stock of energy. A piece of gold is a stock of energy. We are a stock of energy. And stocks of energy like that are also open systems from a thermodynamic standpoint, from the standpoint of the science of energy. We are all receiving energy, and energy flows through us.
Right, so just take a look at the energy picture. 170,000 terawatts of energy per year we use here on planet Earth. Less than 0.1% of that is dedicated to Bitcoin. And that energy is generally discarded energy. Roughly a third of all energy usage in the world or generation is discarded because it takes a lot of energy to move energy, and it is wasted in transmission. So it's not so much about Bitcoin using energy, it's about the rest of the world turning to a system for monetary networks that's more energy efficient, because the current energy efficiency of the fiat money world is horrible.
Yeah, the fiat money is really a future energy. It's a promise to get future energy that's been going to be produced by people that are in debt with the system. So it's monetizing, the fiat system is monetizing future energy, whereas Bitcoin is monetizing current and past energy in the form of surpluses.
All right, because the fiat money system is all about debt, right? We live in a world
that is a promise to get energy in the future from the debt of...
Right, the global economy is something like the debt to equity for the world is like 300%. Yeah, so the GDP of the world is about $100 trillion, and there's more than $300 trillion worth of debt. So that GDP of the world is dedicated to try to pay off that debt.
Absolutely.
And the ease in which you can incur debt is extraordinarily simple and easy to do. You just need to call up the central bank, and they'll give you all the money you want at 0% interest rate. Then they'll say, go out there and spend energy to go pay it off. Bitcoin is saying, wait, no, debt is not necessary in a situation that's run entirely by equity. That is, Bitcoin is 100% equity, you could say, or is that a misstatement? How would you say about that?
Yeah, equity is also a promise. In fact, it's a promise on future dividends, of the company. So it's also a promise. So it's also some kind of future energy. It's a future energy of the company. Actually, equity is a share of that energy. Whereas gold or Bitcoin is really a proof of energy. So it's something that proves that you have expanded or utilized this energy. You've monetized the energy into a technology that. And the purpose of that technology of money is to transfer energy from the past into the present of a transaction. And as you said, it can also translate energy from the future into the transaction. But the problem with translating energy from the future is that the temptation is great to monetize more energy than is going to be produced by the borrowers. It's very tempting. Whereas if it's past energy, you can't fake it, you can't make it up and play games with it. So that's very different. It's a very different view of the world. It's and proof and promise are two different things for most people. But they don't realize for money it applies to money. This distinction applies to money when it comes when it's about money as Bitcoin or as debt.
Right, and you mentioned some thermodynamics in there. Let's talk about, does the use of energy make Bitcoin anti-entropic money as opposed to being, let's say, pro-entropy money? We live in a world of entropy. Everything is degrading. Everything is falling apart. Gold is something that doesn't have a lot of problems in terms of entropy. Gold from 1,000 years ago can be still used today. It's still the same weight. It's an ounce of gold 1,000 years ago is still an ounce of gold, and people still accept it in terms of money. Does Bitcoin share this same attribute? Because this is very hard for a lot of people to wrap their minds around because it's purely electronic, it's virtual.
Very true.
So how do you bridge that gap? And if we're saying it's anti-entropic like gold, how do you explain that?
It's a tough one because gold is perceived as something physical, so you can't touch it. In fact, as you know, atoms are mostly void. 99%, over 99% of an atom is void, so we are all void. We're in fact levitating over these seats because we are not touching it. The atoms are just...
Whoa, wait, you're going off on a tangent there, buddy. We're levitating on the seat. We're not here.
Yes,
it's all void.
When you have a piece of gold in your hand, you are not actually touching it. It's just something that's sitting on your hand. But
you've taken the orange pill, and you're deep in the rabbit hole.
I'm deep in it.
This is what happens. You're an OG for 10 years, and you are living in the rabbit hole.
I'm trying to get out of it. Thank you. So information is perceived as abstract and intangible, whereas it's of the same nature as your DNA is information. Atoms are also information. Entropy is entropy is about energy also, because as you know, entropy, to describe entropy for the listeners is, let's say it's the owner's manual of your universe, and when I get the owner's manual, I reduce my entropy. I reduce my uncertainty about my surroundings. So that's energy, because I have reduced this uncertainty. I will save energy into, for instance, building a piece of furniture. If you get the plan for this piece of furniture, you will spend less energy building the piece of furniture.
All right, let's take this a little bit here.
And Bitcoin is the same. You'll save energy using Bitcoin, so it's equivalent to energy, just like gold, but it's going through the entropy. And entropy is an even more abstract notion as energy. Energy is abstract, but entropy is even more abstract for most people. In fact, some scientists have trouble defining entropy. You could say it's information is negative entropy, but that's not helping.
Right. Okay. So continuing with this idea here, you also speak about a concept, avalanche. And so in the physical world and in the digital world, the systems become lopsided, let's say. Systems, asymmetric risks develop into crashes in the financial markets. One snowflake hits the side of a mountain and it's too much and it starts an avalanche. And so this is something that's part of this physical and non-physical world. It exists both digitally and in the physical world. The need to make equilibrium between systems. I guess that goes back to thermodynamics in some way. So in the case of Bitcoin, it almost seems, Pierre, that Bitcoin possesses attributes of, let's call it, spontaneous order. That would be something that's anti-entropic.
That's the third law of thermodynamics. Is we are all open systems, and Bitcoin is an open system. So as such, it's self-organizing. So it will reduce its entropy to maximize the flow energy through it. So that's exactly what we do as living beings. We minimize our entropy so the flow of energy that's going through us is maximized. That's the third law of thermodynamics. And as a result, we are not in a stable equilibrium. There is no such thing as a stable equilibrium in real life. Take the image of a flag. The flag is kept floating through because the wind is going through it. If there is no wind, the flag will collapse. It's the same for open systems like living beings and societies and civilizations.
Right, got to hold it there. Carry over to a second segment. Thanks so much, Pierre Noizat. And that's going to do it for this edition of Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Pierre Noizat. Until next time, bye, y'all.